this is recording. Can you respond to this?
It's a tough world we live in.
I think what I can say is that ComEd acknowledges repeatedly through the agreement that it believed or it intended to influence the speaker through its conduct.
But before we get to work, I honestly believe that we have to think and acknowledge that our state would not be where it is today without Speaker Madigan. We have to acknowledge that fact.
The indictment alleges a long-term, multifaceted scheme to use public positions for unlawful gain, including no-show or low-show jobs for Madigan's political workers and private gain for Madigan himself.
That's just a few snapshots of the past 5 years of the cloud around former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan. It is Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Here we are Friday, October 4th, and the former Illinois House Speaker set to go and face trial next week, starting with jury selection. And be sure to stay close to thecentersquare.com and the Illinois page, as we've got a team that's going to be tracking this in the courtroom, bringing you updates, and we'll have a lot of that all throughout the next 10 weeks as the judge has laid out the potential schedule, and also making some rulings in leading up to this, some pre-trial judgments here, and one in particular, before we get to the history of how we got to this point, just some headlines. Judge denies motion as Madigan heads to trial next week. This is at thecentersquare.com. My colleague Brett Rowland has been following this very closely. He also reported on the ComEd 4 trial, which we'll touch on a little bit here as we review the history. But of course, the motions that were made were for the charges to be dismissed, and the judge denied that motion, also denying the motion from Mike McLean, who's a co-defendant, to be separated from the trial. So clearly, there's some rulings that have gone against Madigan. He's trying to get this case dismissed, and even the other defendant in the case that's going to be up for next week, Mike McLean, not going to be separated from this. But also, you've got the judge, another headline from Brett here at thecentersquare.com. He reports out that a judge throws ice on Madigan's job recommendations defense. Let's read through this a little bit. Former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan has defended himself for the past 4 years, saying that he was only doing his job, and that part of the job was making job recommendations. Madigan, who's held sway over the Illinois State House as leader of the Democratic Party and Speaker of the House for decades, argued in motions that the judge should toss the racketeering and bribery charges against him because he was performing his job. What exactly was that job that he says he was performing? Well, let's delve into this. So Madigan had been Speaker for 50 years before he stepped down in 2021. Before that, in 2020, he was implicated as public official A in a ComEd deferred prosecution agreement. Before that, he was embroiled with members of his office being let go after sexual harassment and other harassment claims. How he handled those things was being scrutinized quite a bit all the way back into 2017. Now, I've been at the Illinois State House as a State House reporter for 10 years now, and being able to be on the ground and watch how the quote-unquote sausage is made, colloquial term for a phrase, how kind of gross it is when you watch legislation being crafted so close. But I've had some interactions with the speaker, and over those years, being part of Illinois News Network, which evolved into the Center Square over time with Illinois Radio Network, I would regularly be part of press gaggles asking the speaker questions, and he would imply that I was part of the Illinois Republican Party when we, of course, as Illinois News Network and the Center Square, are a nonpartisan, nonprofit newswire service. But Madigan would come out time and again, point at me, instantly try to jab at me as other members of the media are around. I'm not going to lie, as a reporter, kind of intimidating as the former Illinois House Speaker is involved there. But here's some of the questions I would ask.
Harassment, retaliation, intimidation, these are a pretty, variety of range of serious behavior. What does that say about your office?
What it says is that Heather, when she was the ethics officer and the current ethics officer, will receive and process any complaint that is brought to us.
But are you? Is there a culture in your office that
There's
fosters this behavior?
there's no culture with me. And if you read through how these were processed, you can see that at the leadership level, we don't tolerate inappropriate behavior. We just don't tolerate it. And you know that. It's nice of you to ask the question, but you know what I'm saying is true.
Ultimately, though, the speaker in his office having to let go Tim Mapes, who was recently just found guilty of lying to federal prosecutors, the guy there on the right.
Are you the guy from the Policy Institute?
No, I'm from Illinois News Network.
Okay.
What kind of challenges? What kind of challenges?
Is that the guy from the Policy Institute?
Yeah. Illinois News Network, Franklin Center.
Same difference.
When are you guys going to fold your tent?
All right, thanks, everybody.
Obviously, that tent still here. Yes, it's evolved over time from Illinois News Network to Illinois Radio Network and Illinois News Network to then we brought on Watchdog and rebranded to the Center Square. And we've been the Center Square now for over 5 years, still on the ground covering Illinois state government. So we haven't, put up our tent. But obviously, you can kind of pick up on some of the intimidation tactics that it seemed the former Illinois House Speaker would employ on the ground from people asking tough questions.
So what can we expect for...
Which one is from the Policy Institute?
Right here.
Right here?
Illinois News Network.
Yeah, there.
And you live in Lincoln Tower?
We're neighbors. Are these
do
intimidation?
I.
Are these
Speaker,
intimidation
so do I.
techniques?
Yeah, right.
Only if you want it to be.
So my question there was, are these intimidation techniques? And his spokesman says only if you want them to be. So that's just giving you a little bit of a flavor of the personal interactions that Madigan could have with other people at the State House, even on camera. But there's been a push to try to remove his nexus of power for years. Madigan, not only a longtime House Speaker for all but 2 years from 1983 to 2021. And then he was also, a member of the Illinois House for 50 years. He was also the Democratic Party chairman as being speaker from like 1998 till 2021. So that nexus of power of being the person who controls what gets through the State House, but also controls the Democratic Party of Illinois purse. You can see how he's able to really have ability to direct legislation, to direct members to vote certain ways, to reward people who go his way with political contributions for their races, to not give money to people who don't go his way, and so on. So there was an effort to try to shore this up at the Illinois State House, saying that you can't be, a member of the of a political party, the executive director, and also be a legislator. But there was also moves to bring about term limits. Here's some of that conversation when we asked Madigan about term limits, because there was a movement, even in the Illinois Senate, of making that happen.
Speaker, the Senate caucus has leadership term limits. The Republican caucus has leadership term limits.
Thanks,
Should have term limits for you.
So he says that there should be term limits for me when I asked that question. Again, just kind of some of the various interactions that Madigan had on the Illinois Capitol grounds. More about back in 2019, rumblings of investigations were circulating. Reports out of Chicago of various alder people being investigated for corruption, and how there may have been surreptitious recordings of Madigan. And when I asked him that question, it was at the beginning of the segment. He said it's a cruel world or a tough world out there. But anyways, asking him about these rumblings of investigations.
Deposition that was released, that was published, and also the questions about the whole Gonzalez case. But you also had a moment caught on some kind of surreptitious recording. Can you respond to those?
It's a tough world we live in.
It's a tough world we live in, he said. All right, to Democrats at that time in 2019, with all the speculation of investigations of Madigan, here's what Governor J.B. Pritzker had to say.
Well, as I've said before, I think we need to see this process play itself out. It's hard to tell. I know what you know, what I've read in the newspaper, so we're going to have to see where this leads to.
Have you been contacted at all?
I have not.
That doesn't really answer the question. Do you still have confidence in Speaker Madigan?
Well, again, we're moving forward. Allegations are just that, and so we'll see. I haven't actually seen what those allegations might be. I mean, I think at this point, there are a number of people have been contacted. We've read the stories that you all have put out, but it's hard to tell what it's really all about.
I'm following the news just like anyone out there, waiting to see what they discover. He's still the Speaker of the House. We work with other elected officials to accomplish our agenda, and we'll follow this case just like other people.
So again, that's Governor J.B. Pritzker and Treasurer Michael Frerichs, I believe, back in 2019 when all of these stories were coming out of Madigan. Possibly being embroiled in various investigations. But then 2020 happened. COVID-19, the governor locks the state down, saying that, small businesses can't allow people in. That happens for several months, and that's all the major focus. But then in 2020, of the summer of 2020, federal prosecutors released a deferred prosecution agreement that's essentially highlighted a 10-year-long bribery scheme. They say public official A, who was the Speaker of the Illinois House, didn't name Madigan, just public official A, was able to curry favor from ComEd in order to get favorable legislation for them. ComEd agreeing to this in that deferred prosecution agreement. Here's Deanne Mazzocchi, a state rep from back in 2020 after that deferred prosecution agreement was revealed in the summer.
And now we have the Speaker of the House, Democrat Party Chairman Mike Madigan, called public official A in the ComEd federal deferred prosecution agreement. Let's be clear. In this deferred prosecution agreement, ComEd has agreed to the corruption findings. That's why they're paying $200 million. They are not implied findings. They're not even in dispute between the feds and ComEd.
And then I was able to also ask State Representative Bob Rita to react to the deferred prosecution agreement. That was a Republican state rep, Deanne Mazzocchi, now a Democrat state rep, current one, by the way, Bob Rita, who also testified during the ComEd 4 trial that took place. So that'll be interesting to see if he comes up during the Madigan trial. As well as a possible witness. But anyways, back to 2020, when I asked Bob Rita about the ComEd deferred prosecution agreement, here's what he had to say.
It's early on, and if these allegations are true, then time will tell on that and take the appropriate action. So at this time, it's all premature in what we're hearing and what we know, and very limited facts on what went on. But if that allegations are true, then appropriate action should be taken.
And again, this is all before federal prosecutors ended up coming out and actually naming Madigan in a criminal indictment. So this was 2020, the summer of 2020. All we had was the deferred prosecution agreement that named ComEd. But it also said public official A is the Illinois House Speaker, and you can deduce from that, obviously, it's Mike Madigan. But there was also a hearing, a special House hearing called for to look into this, and it was a bipartisan House hearing with 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans looking into these allegations circling around Madigan. They called for this hearing, this special investigating committee, I believe is what it was called back in late 2020. And who led that was now current Illinois House Speaker Chris Welch. While he was just a state representative back then, he held the position as chair of this special investigating committee. Here's a bit about what he had to say around that time, late 2020.
For a subpoena of Madigan, what do you want to see to get Madigan here to testify?
Right now, I believe it was premature. I think there's more work that needs to be done. We're going to take it under advisement, and just like we've done with every other request they've made, we are going to look into it. We're going to ask our legislative staff to do the due diligence and the prudence necessary to answer that question. And I'm going to look to their guidance.
So he's the chair of this special investigating committee. The question was, what is it going to take to get Madigan to actually testify during that special investigating committee from the House? This was before, again, this was a year and a half before the federal prosecutors actually leveled the charges against Madigan. And one of the things we heard from Democrats back then was, let's let the process play out. But Republicans were saying, no, we have the ability to delve into this now and not wait for the federal prosecutors to do what they need to do. So Republicans were trying to get to the bottom of it so that taxpayers could see what they were in store for. But still, no way was the Democrat on the Special Investigating Committee going to subpoena Madigan. Republicans around that time, again, late 2020, reacting to some of that as well.
Do you have confidence that Representative Welch is able to manage this appropriately with enough distance between him and Madigan?
Oh, he's certainly managing it, whether the distance of, between him and Speaker Madigan, I think you can see that for yourself. And we also, learned this week that Chris Welch had no problem reaching out to Speaker Madigan and said, give my wife a job, see if you can get my mom a job. I believe it was his mother, right? And there were other individuals where he was trying to use the Speaker's clout to get jobs. So, I think that you even heard that in some of the questioning today. It's really troubling to me that people are saying that this is, something like, oh, well, what's the big deal? Everybody does it. No, this is not what Illinois should be about.
And clearly, the questions of corruption were swirling around for years around Madigan. But when that deferred prosecution agreement came out in the summer of 2020, leading to that special House investigating committee, you had officials from ComEd who agreed to come testify and talk about how they agreed, they were part of this scheme to give do-nothing jobs to Madigan Associates in favor for favorable legislation.
I think what I can say is that ComEd acknowledges repeatedly through the agreement that it believed or it intended to influence the Speaker through its conduct, whether it in fact influenced the Speaker, whether the Speaker was aware of its intent to influence. Those are questions that I don't think I'm in a position to comment on.
Okay, but certainly ComEd believed that when Mr. McLean, for example, was making these demands on behalf of the Speaker, they didn't think that Mr. McLean was lying to them.
No.
Right, they thought that he was authorized to make these statements by Mike Madigan.
They believed him, yes.
Okay, and so Doherty said, the payments to Madigan's associates are being made, quote, to keep Madigan happy. I think it's worth it, because you'd hear otherwise, right?
Yes.
That in this conversation, he indicated that Madigan naming these individuals for ComEd to hire for decades was, quote, was part of a, quote, old-fashioned patronage system, close quote.
Yes.
Okay. That's how McLean, at least, was explaining the scheme to ComEd.
That's correct. DPA acknowledges that this was part of part of a course of conduct with that overall intent, and specifically acknowledges that ComEd appointed board member 1 in part with the intent to influence and reward Speaker Madigan.
So clearly ComEd at that time, back in December of 2020, when they were having these special House investigating committees a year and a half before the actual federal charges against Madigan, there wasn't much resolution. They had I think 3 hearings with this special investigative committee, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, and they had a motion that Democrats put up on the final hearing just before the Christmas holiday, and here's how that played out.
The motion was made by Representative Manley to authorize the charge against, as stated in the petition, against Speaker Madigan. And for the things I said on the record, I vote no.
Demmer?
Yes.
Hernandez? No. Manley? No. Mazzocchi? Yes. Worley?
Yes.
With 3 votes in favor, 3 votes against, the motion fails. There being no further business before this committee, the Special Investigation Committee will stand in recess until the call of the chair.
So I think that you have to look at this pattern of looking for every possible angle to avoid getting the truth on the record, to avoid having the committee do its job of conducting an investigation, and then coming into your first meeting in over 2 months with a motion teed up that you're going to vote against and kill. The intent is clear.
A fair process here. What does it say that you guys came in and people are going to see this and say you guys came in defense of Madigan? Instead of having a fair and open process, came in with motions all ready to go to vote against them. What does that say?
We came in and defended the process. We were guardians of the
Doesn't
process.
the process
You-
still be to have people testify and have more than one witness?
We had 3 members on the other side of the aisle, week after week, profess that Mike Madigan was guilty without even hearing from one witness. How are we going to conduct a fair, impartial investigation when they had their minds already made up before the ink was dry on that petition?
Again, that was just after the December 2020 final special investigative committee looking into the allegations surrounding Madigan. And that was a year and a half before federal prosecutors actually laid out their charges against Madigan. Continuing on now, flash forwarding all the way up to January of 2021, after an election in November where Democrats maintained the House. Madigan was reelected, Welch was reelected, Mazzocchi was not. So here we are in January 2021, and there was a growing, building movement to say Madigan shouldn't be speaker anymore because of all of the allegations that were surrounding him. And who did ultimately become speaker? Illinois State Representative Chris Welch, accepting that speakership nomination and ultimately winning it. And here he is from January of 2021.
But before we get to work, I honestly believe that we have to think and acknowledge that our state would not be where it is today without Speaker Madigan. We have to acknowledge that fact. While our state has many problems, our schools are better, more children have access to health care, and our working class families can more easily live the American dream.
So again, that's Welch accepting the speakership in 2021, January. At that time, the leading Illinois House Republican, Jim Durkin, essentially counters Welch, saying that things aren't great in Illinois, and that's thanks to House Speaker Michael Madigan.
Mr. Madigan's record will long be reviewed and analyzed. His legacy leaves broken promises to Illinois taxpayers. Listen, a legacy driven by absolute power and control, so much that his business model forced the largest public utility in the state to enter into a deferred prosecution agreement with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Chicago. That's an admission of fact. A 9-year scheme to bribe. This is my time to talk. What's it about? No-show jobs, board appointments, contracts run through a third party to benefit his allies, all to influence and reward his effort to assist ComEd with legislation. The legacy is also one which failed its citizens with unbalanced budgets, broken pension systems, tax increase after tax increase, with nothing to show for it.
And again, also Democrat supermajorities, as Madigan for decades held the party purse strings while also dictating what was able to get through the House. But that was January of 2021. All right, so we've gone through, all throughout the past 5 years here, and deferred prosecution agreement revealed in the summer of 2020. Madigan not named in that, though it was public official A as the Illinois House Speaker. ComEd agrees they were taking part in corrupt practices as part of that deferred prosecution agreement. Illinois Republicans in the House demanded a special investigating committee. That played out in the fall of 2020, and it was a 3 Republican, 3 Democrat panel. At the end of it, Democrats ultimately blocked having the movement of the charges against Madigan, which could have had some more remedy a lot quicker. But then in December of 2020, they put that committee away. Election happened in November before that, but then the new General Assembly comes in January 2021. Speaker Welch is the speaker. And then you have time go by, took about a year and a half, but federal prosecutors then held a news conference with Trump-appointed federal prosecutor John Lausch announcing the charges against Madigan.
Today, a federal grand jury returned a 22-count indictment charging former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan and his close friend Michael McLean with racketeering conspiracy, bribery, wire fraud, and extortion offenses. The indictment accuses Madigan of leading, for nearly a decade, a criminal enterprise whose purpose was to enhance Madigan's political power and financial well-being while also generating income for his political allies and associates. The charges allege that Madigan used his various elected and professional positions to further the goals of the criminal enterprise. Those positions included Speaker of the Illinois House, Representative of Illinois' 22nd District, Committeeman for Chicago's 13th Ward, Chairman of both the Illinois Democratic Party and the 13th Ward Democratic Organization, and partner for the Chicago law firm of Madigan and Getz and Danner. The indictment alleges that Madigan, McLean, and other members of the enterprise unlawfully solicited benefits from businesses and other private parties. As alleged in the indictment, Madigan and McLean unlawfully requested that various companies and interests with interest in state legislation, including utility company Commonwealth Edison, pay Madigan's associates as a reward for their loyalty to Madigan, at times in return for performing little to no legitimate work for those businesses. The indictment also accuses Madigan of engaging in multiple schemes to secure business for his law firm, including work from parties with business before the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago. The indictment alleges a long-term, multifaceted scheme to use public positions for unlawful gain, including no-show or low-show jobs for Madigan's political workers and private gain for Madigan himself. The schemes describe involvement of a leader of state government, one of his close confidants, top management of a large public utility, consultants, and others. Unfortunately, this type of criminal conduct drastically undermines the public's confidence in our government. Simply put, it's not a good thing. As I've said before, we have a very stubborn public corruption problem here in Illinois. Rooting out and prosecuting public corruption has been and will always be a top priority of this office. This investigation remains ongoing. We have more work ahead of us, and we will get that work done.
Again, John Lausch, former federal prosecutor for the Northern District of Illinois, a holdover from the Trump administration into the Biden administration in his announcement of the charges against Madigan from the summer of 2022. Actually, I think it was March of 2022 when those charges were ultimately announced. So when are we going to hear the trial? Well, it's going to happen next week. Jury selection against Madigan and McLean, and we'll have the Center Square on the ground covering all of that. We'll talk with reporters.
This is not just an indictment.
We'll talk with reporters Brett Rowland, investigative reporter there, and then also Jim Talamonte, as they're going to be in the Chicago area covering that trial for us with the Center Square. So get the newsletter there. Also, wake up with us every morning. We'll have the breakdown for what happened the day before to keep track of everything that's being revealed. Because if one thing's clear, the ComEd 4 trial had a lot of evidence, video evidence, undercover wire recordings. So it's going to be interesting to kind of lift the curtain and see what was going on behind the scenes. All right, stay tuned. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and join us each and every weekday morning with Illinois in Focus Daily as part of America's Talking Network.